into the content of this book and to ask Lisa to share with us some tips and ideas for preaching through this election season. Lisa, welcome to this time with the Clergy Emergency League. We are so honored to have you with us today.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for the invitation. And especially Leah and Stephen, thank you for getting this started. It is absolutely one of the things that gives me such hope that we know how, have some sense of how hard it was back in the 1930s. And this makes me feel, for as difficult as this time is, we have learned some things from history, and we are starting 10 steps ahead of where things were back then. We're not starting things from whole cloth because of the ways that we are gathering clergy together and working to support each other from the get-go. So thank you, both of you, for your courage and capabilities applied to this, because we need each other as clergy more than ever. So thank you.
Absolutely, you're right. The idea for this came from the Pastors Emergency League, that was that was started by clergy in Nazi Germany, and they were trying to resist the Third Reich. And they had pastors that were from different parts of Germany who saw what was happening and wanted to find ways to resist, whether that was through preaching, through helping people to escape from the Nazi regime. They wrote the Barmen Declaration, and the Confessing Church came out of that. So you're right, Lisa. We can draw on our history to learn how we can do this to resist the authoritarianism and the fascism that we are seeing rising in this country today, and equip our pastors to be able to speak prophetically, especially when they're in congregations where things are challenging, because they are what I would call in the purple zone. They've got red state Christians, they got blue state Christians, and we have to be pastors to all of them.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you, what prompted you to write The Gospel People Don't Want to Hear? I mean, you've been working with pastors for the last, gosh, how long ago did you start Backstory Preaching?
2016.
Okay, so for almost 5 years now, you've been working with like 1,000 pastors that and across the United States and really across the world. So what have you been hearing and seeing among preachers that you've been working with at Backstory Preaching that told you, okay, there's a book that needs to be written here, and I need to write this book? Tell us about where this came from.
Yeah, thank you. I was recognizing that we were already in an unprecedented time, and the entire book was written and published before COVID, or it was published just as COVID was taking over the United States. But it was not on the horizon. Black Lives Matter and all of that has happened after George Floyd's death. None of that was anybody thinking about. But what I did see was the writing on the wall, that there were already so many changes that were in motion, that were, the genies had left the bottles and they were not going back, between things like technology, globalization, climate change, and that we're entering into a second reformation of the church, that it was already a really, really hard time. And the political climate was getting to be more and more tense. And I realized that none of us is of an age when we have been through something like this before. We've been through episodic things, sort of, I don't mean to trivialize any of it, but sort of one-offs. There was women's ordination, or there was gay marriage. There was sort of one thing at a time sequentially, but this was all together, all at once. And I got thinking back to what was some of the training that happened in the 1960s, which was the last time the entire country was under the same kind of duress at the same time. What training did they go through? And we had nothing. nothing ready or prepared. And in particular, our parishioners were not ready to hear that things were going to be changing and that they weren't going back. We already had enough nostalgia going on, pining for the church of old. If we only bring back children, if only we can draw in the families, our churches will be full again. We'll have full. That was already gone.
That
It's
train has
not
left the
coming back.
station. Yeah. Yeah.
So what were we going to need to start preaching to prepare people for a future they didn't want to face, a gospel they didn't want to hear?
So the primary metaphor, the theme that you lay out right at the very beginning is the idea that the sky is falling.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the theme that runs through the book, but it's not like the sky is falling Chicken Little style. Like this is literally, in some cases, when you think about climate change, the sky is falling.
Yeah.
And you know, what you point out is that people will say, I don't recognize the world around me. I don't recognize my church. I don't recognize my school. I don't recognize my community. These are some of the ways that people are articulating how much things have changed, as you said, this sort of
Mm-hmm.
unprecedented change. And you noted that the book was written before COVID-19 even happened, before George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter protests really took off. But certainly, you know, you saw the writing on the wall, and even in the last 7 months, pastors are seeing things that the world looks very different to them now and to their parishioners.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're working with pastors in the mentor groups, um, what are they saying about what it's like to be the church, to minister in the post-COVID world?
Yeah. Uh, One of the ways that this is so hard to be a minister during these times is because we are experiencing everything our parishioners are.
Hmm.
Unlike when a parishioner has a loved one die, we offer pastoral care, we conduct the funeral, and we go home.
Hmm.
But the grief, the tumult, the chaos, the sadness and the grief is ours, and we cannot escape what is happening around us. And so what I hear are what our parishioners are going through too. There is so much stress, so much fatigue, good days, bad days, uh, not knowing quite what to do next, not seeing that path forward. And so how do we have hope? How do we keep preaching the same things over and over and over? God hasn't left us. God is still present. There is a way through, over and over and over again, when we're not even sure we can see it for ourselves yet. That's hard.
Yeah.
Why we need each other.
I've been working with a group of pastors in a grant that I'm running right now, and we trained them in doing a sermon dialogue, sermon method, and we talked to them last year. We did interviews with the pastors and the lay leaders. We did surveys with them, and then we did it again this coming year, and we just did it in September and did these surveys. And what we found is that the parishioners are very appreciative of everything that their pastors have done for the most part. They're
Mm-hmm.
very appreciative of the way pastors just on the fly learned how to do online worship, learned how to do live streaming, tried to keep community going, trying to connect, trying to do pastoral care.
Mm-hmm.
But two things that seem to come up is that, first of all, parishioners don't really have a full scope of just how much work it is
Right.
to design these worship services, because there is such a learning curve, and it takes so much more energy. Even doing drive-in church, you got to haul everything out, you got to hook everything up, you got to
Right.
haul everything back in. It's like we've gone from temple worship to tabernacle worship, where things are moving all the time. The ground is constantly moving beneath our feet,
Right.
and it's hard to find our hard to find that solid ground.
Mm-hmm.
And so pastors are feeling, like you said, exhausted. They're weary.
Mm-hmm.
And then they have parishioners who are not happy with the way things are. They're not happy that their building isn't open. They're not happy that they have to wear a mask. And they're getting a lot of pushback, even from parishioners who might have been allies before.
Yeah.
It seems like the relationships have changed, the rules have changed, and the entire structure of how we do things has changed.
Mm-hmm.
So, how are you? What are you saying to folks to uplift their spirits and buoy them in the
Mm-hmm.
midst of this very tumultuous time?
Yeah. It is. I'm hearing exactly the same things, that the gratitude, preachers had probably never been felt so appreciated as they did after Easter this
Mm,
last year, because of the Herculean efforts people knew they were making to get church up and running and keep it going. And they were so grateful for it. Well, the novelty's worn off.
yep.
We don't see an end in sight, and so people are stuck at home, and we're getting itchier and itchier. Winter's coming on, and so those who've been able to do some outdoor worship, that's not going to happen much longer. And we need to be with each other. We are social creatures, so what do? It, in some ways, we can't blame parishioners for not understanding what goes into this. My experience is parishioners don't know what it takes for us to craft a sermon.
Right. Let alone try to do worship in three different
Exactly.
venues.
Exactly. What and under what circumstances would they know or understand what all of this requires? Um, One of my very, very big concerns for clergy going forward is going to be what happens when we are able to gather in person and or online,
Right.
because I think online worship is here to stay.
Yes.
Here is my best guesstimate crystal ball
Hmm.
prediction, and that is that clergy will be assumed to continue in person and online, but there will not be the conversations to say, okay, then what comes off my plate?
Right.
Because I can't do all this all the time.
Exactly.
And if
Exactly.
clergy don't have that conversation with their leadership and say, I've got this much time, we all have to decide together, what are the priorities? What do you
Mm,
most want me to be a part of?
mm, mm.
Because not only do we have that reality coming, but think about the backlog. We have graduations and weddings and memorial services and burials for ashes. We have celebrations of confirmations and graduations, that all of this stuff hasn't happened. There's this backlog that's building up. And normal life is going to continue. We're going to have more weddings, and we're going to have more funerals. We're going to have more graduations. There is, I see the writing on the wall for that one, for clergy health and clergy
Yes.
wellness,
Right.
because we cannot do this forever.
Hmm.
So one thing I suggest is that clergy start now to be thinking about, what exactly is my call?
Wow.
And
Yep.
it wasn't our call to be online digital producers.
Mm,
It's
mm.
not, it's not there. I looked at
Hmm.
my fine print, it's hanging on my wall. I didn't sign that.
Right. That was not part of our ordination vows.
No. So it is a very good time to be reassessing what is most important. What is your ministry? What is the ministry of this congregation?
Mm,
So that we can start now to be gaining some clarity about what are we really about,
yeah.
when it comes to worshiping God and bring the good news of Jesus Christ out to the world. What does that mean for us? What's it going to look like going forward?
So this brings us back around to the messages people don't want to hear. People are
Mhm.
not going to want to hear that there are limits on what can be done.
Right.
We've gotten into a sort of a pattern of expectation now, and people are excited that, when they see, gosh, our worship attendance has
Hmm.
blossomed because
Right.
we're online, and people are hearing the gospel message through screens, through Zooms, through Facebook, through YouTube, who never darkened the door of a church before. Wow.
Hmm.
So there's incredible opportunity for evangelism in the midst
Yep.
of that. At the same time, you're right. It's to try to, like, there are some pastors who are doing multiple services in multiple formats, indoor, outdoor, and online. That's a lot. That's too much.
It is. Yeah, it's
So
absolutely unsustainable.
so the a message of what's not sustainable is a challenging message.
Hmm.
And one of the things you say is that a challenging sermon is determined by the relationship the listener has to their sky.
Hmm.
So something that we say reminds them that they're holding up a sky that they're not yet ready to let go of.
Right. Right.
So what what is that sky?
Hmm.
Paint us a picture of what this sky is and how preachers can speak to this.
Yeah. So what I make the claim is that a challenging sermon is not determined by the subject matter. It's not because we preach about, let's say we bring up Black Lives Matter, or we preach about climate change, or we preach about ordinary human decency.
Mm,
That is that's not the problem. That's not what makes it challenging. What makes a sermon challenging is how the listener interprets what the preacher is saying that poses a threat to something they value.
yes.
For example, when it comes to Black Lives Matter or issues of racism, there is so much that is represented by that phrase, um, that people people have a knee-jerk reaction of feel many of not all, of course, of feeling threatened. That, for example, I may feel threatened that you were going to call me a racist, so I
Mm,
feel afraid that I'm about to be shamed.
yes.
I might feel afraid, feel threatened that I am going to have to change my way of life, that my homogenous town where I live, that I understand, I know who grew up here. I graduated from high school with you. I know people, which means I feel safe. I feel like I belong. I feel secure. So if people I am not as familiar with come in, well, now I'm starting to wonder, and it doesn't have to be rational. Remember that
Mm,
it's an emotional response. People can start feeling like, am I safe? Do I belong? Will my kids be safe? Am I still going to have a job? Is it possible that if affirmative action actually works, I could lose my job or my promotion? I'm not saying it's fair. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying this isn't all stuff that needs to go. It does. But that doesn't matter for what somebody is feeling inside. So imagining what's at stake, and especially underneath, fundamentally, am I safe? Do I belong?
mm,
Am I safe? And do I belong? And are the people I love safe?
right.
Are my children safe? Are my are my investments safe? Is my property value safe? So safety is not just physical, it's also in relationships and jobs and knowing what to expect when I get out of bed in the morning.
Mm,
There are so many layers to that, but relationships, and your livelihood, being able to make a living, your roles, who am I? So, for example, in church life, when when we change something up inside a church system, one of the reasons that can be threatening is I know my place in this system of the church. if things start shifting, will I belong? Do I have a place? Do I know how I can contribute? Or might that be taken away from me? So our skies are the things we value. And a lot of
Mm.
times we don't even recognize, we don't even know that's what's underneath it all. So when it comes to addressing what's happening, my first suggestion is imagine, empathize.
Yes.
When we've got people in our congregations that who are worried about what's happening around, what are they worried about? What are
Mm.
they afraid they're going to lose? And then here's the big piece about what people don't want to hear is to feel that a lot of these things are not only, some of them are good that have to go, some are inevitable and you're not going to stop it, but there is life after death. This is not the end. If we are people of faith who follow Jesus Christ, who died and rose from the dead to bring us to new life, there is always resurrection on the other side.
Mm.
But you got to die to get there. And that's what we don't like,
I
is
don't
we
want to
have
hear
to die
that.
to get there.
Do I really want to taking up the cross hurts? I mean,
Exactly.
it is so painful.
Yes.
So I think one of the most important things that preachers can do is you talk about, picking up the paint, like understanding God is painting the new sky. How are we being invited to pick up that paintbrush and be co-creators of the new sky?
Right.
So part of our job as preachers is to be able to activate that prophetic imagination,
Exactly.
to
Right.
that just I wonder what it would be like if,
Yes.
and use that language to say, wow, I know that we're going to have job loss when we switch to a clean energy economy, but I
Hmm.
wonder what it would be like to have no children having to call off school because of asthma from air
Exactly.
pollution. Wow, what might that be like? And how
Yes.
might we move from the pain of job loss to this new vision of clean air? How can what role does the church have in ushering in this new creation that God is calling us toward?
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And part of what you said also reminds me of that how important it is that we are doing this work ourselves. So, for example, when I think about job loss, I grew up with a lot of insecurity, financial insecurity as a child when my dad was between jobs, and it was a real thing, and the stress in the house was out of this world when my dad wasn't working.
Mm.
And so for me, for example, tapping into that fear of, let's just take us, for example, the church is changing. We don't know how many clergy it's going to take to run the church of the future. It's not like we've got a ton of other things that we can offer to the labor force out there. We're pretty specialized. If the church changes and we lose some of our congregations, how are we going to make a living?
Mm.
I don't
Mm.
know.
Yeah.
But it's looking at that concern and that fear and remembering what it felt like when I was a kid, that then I can use that. I can use that empathy to be able to say, yeah, if we go through this, I live in the Houston, Texas metro. I mean, it's all oil and gas around here.
Yeah.
I've seen the ups and downs and what that does to families. I've seen what happens literally 2 doors down from me. But that doesn't mean we can't move toward clean energy. It just means how are we going to help negotiate and transition people to help them through the 40 years of desert
Mm.
until we can get to that promised land? Because the desert time matters as much to us as church as it will once we get through it.
So what I hear you saying is that we've got some great biblical language and metaphors
Yes.
to help articulate the experiences of people so
Yeah,
that we can be grounded in the biblical story while we're living through our own story.
exactly. Right. Right. Right.
So let me let me push a little bit into the political here.
Hmm.
Um, you say at one point in the book that there are certain skies that we can't let fall, like planetary ecological health. If that falls, there's, and there is a real question of whether the planet is going to be able to sustain human life and in the trajectory that we're going.
Hmm.
So along a different line, but also as painful as that can be, many people are concerned that in this election season, democracy itself is on the line.
Yeah.
Would you say that democracy is a sky that we cannot let fall?
Yeah. Um, in part because there is no better. We don't have another alternative. I mean, the if there were perhaps competing systems that had the potential to uphold the dignity of every human being, there might be an argument for that. But we don't have one.
Hmm.
It's sort of democracy or it's autocracy of some way, shape, or form. There is no alternative. If we are to claim that love of God and love of neighbor is our paramount, fundamental place from which we operate, democracy, for all of its flaws and for all of the ways that it is still growing up and it has never reached its full potential, of course, and of any system we've got so far, it's the one that affords the greatest opportunity to afford people the respect they are due.
Hmm. Hmm.
I was I was thinking about this recently with the story of the rich young man,
Mm-hmm.
and so you remember, of course, he goes to Jesus, and what must I do to inherit eternal life? And essentially, his question is asking, what do I need to do to save my eternal neck?
Right.
And Jesus, ticks off the list of, here are all the laws and love God, love neighbor, and the guy says, well, yeah, okay, I pretty much got that down. And Jesus then says, and then go sell all you've got and give it to the poor, which he was not able to meet that challenge in the moment. And I realized that the rich young man's question is all about him. What
Hmm.
do I need to do for me? How am I going to ensure I've got this long life, an eternal? How do I make sure I'm safe and I belong? But it's
There you
all
go.
about him.
Right. Right.
Jesus turns that around and says, it's not about you, it's about everybody else. It's about loving God, it's loving your neighbor. Get rid of your stuff so that it's not, so you don't keep getting fooled that it's about you. That if you're going to follow me, it's about everybody else. It
But that
seems, I'm sorry.
people don't want to hear that, because
No.
what you're saying then is that we have to give up something that can ensure our life. And it's Luther's incurvatus in se, like we are being invited to get outside and look around, but that may mean letting go and trusting in the goodness of God and the goodness of the community, that we're going to have enough,
Yeah.
that it's going to be sufficient.
Right.
And a lot of what we see says otherwise, that we
Hmm.
can't trust other people. And
Right.
so we have to look out for ourselves, and we
Hmm.
have to look out for our clan. And
Hmm.
that's about all I've got bandwidth for.
Right.
So
Yep.
how can pastors speak to this? I mean,
Hmm.
how can we lend our voices and our moral authority to defend democracy when there are other forces and other voices that are manipulating the fears about safety and
Hmm.
belonging in order to amass wealth and power.
Right, right. So I am going to answer your question, but it's going to sound a bit, it's going to come across a bit roundabout. We have in at least the American church, and I think this is true in other places as well, we have bought into a, a capitalist transactional understanding of what church is about. We go to church because of what I'm going to get out of it.
Hmm.
I'm going to go to church because it feeds me. And we see this because we are choosing our churches in part because we go to the places where politically, socially, people agree with us. We hear what we want to hear. We surround ourselves with people as often as we can who are like-minded. And when we're not like-minded, we just don't talk about it because we feel like we can't talk. This is in keeping with our whole cultural shift away and biblical norm that community is the locus. Community is the center of being. And we are individualistically centered in the core of the way we see the world now. And so we church shop to find what works for me.
Hmm.
In this same way, that's where I see this story of the rich young man being so pivotal, because what we learn in the church is if you are a follower of Jesus Christ, if I am a follower of Jesus Christ, what do I get out of it? What's in it for me that I follow Jesus Christ? What are the rewards and benefits? What's the quid pro quo that I get out of this? Instead, what I think Jesus did in that story was to say, rather than if you are to follow me, what am I going to get out of it? It's if I am a follower of Jesus Christ, if I am, what do you get out of it?
Wow. Wow. You just turned it inside out. I love it. That is amazing.
So, as a follower of Jesus Christ, what do you get out of it? And I think that is because, yes, we are very short on bandwidth. But what is one of the first things we do when we want to feel better? You go help someone else.
Hmm.
You go help someone else. And when we can combine that with what's in it for you, that I
Mm-hmm.
follow Jesus Christ,
Mm-hmm.
with story and empathy
Yes.
to begin to show this is what's happening out there. And it doesn't take a whole lot. I just saw a headline. I did not read the story of a church that has put together a place for children to be able to have the technology in a parish hall to be able to do their school online, because there are so many kids who don't have enough of the technological help infrastructure in their homes, and so they're falling behind in schools.
Hmm.
That's not that hard to do. So finding those ways to say, what can I do for you because I follow Jesus Christ? I
Hmm.
think starting to ask that question and turning it over, then it gets away from some of the harder things about don't ask me to do something I don't want to do. It's what can I do to help someone? Because you'll feel it still ends up what's in it for you. You'll feel better, but that's okay. We work with what we've got. Um, and helping people find those ways. What's in it for you?
Beautiful, beautiful. Let's see if we have any questions from those who are tuning in. Stephen, do we have anybody that that has some questions that they want to ask?
Oh, sorry. Did you try to unmute me?
No, I just invited you to unmute.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I had to step out for just a second, so I missed about the past 60 seconds.
Just wanted to find out if there were any questions in the chat that people have posed that we can address.
Yes, absolutely. So, let's see here. three very different questions, and I'm trying to figure out. I see. So first, Ann Pickering said, "How can lay people that are very involved help?" Uh,
Hmm.
big question there. So I don't know if y'all wanted to talk a little. We're talking a lot about our role as clergy. I think her question is geared a little bit more to how can we love and encourage and challenge our lay people to get involved. So I don't know if y'all want to respond to that. And I've got two other questions for you.
Yeah, that's great. I want to say something, and then I want to turn it over to you, Lisa. When we were talking with the pastors and lay leaders in this grant project, one of the lay leaders said that she had gone to her church to do a recording for the reading for the worship service, and she said, I got there and there were wires everywhere and cameras. And she said, I just had no idea what goes into this. And it just completely changed my perspective on what pastors are doing, what we're expecting them to do. And as you said, Lisa, we can't expect them to know because they don't even know what goes into a sermon. But I wonder, that John McClure wrote a book called the Round Table Pulpit,
Mhm.
where the model is that you actually invite people into your sermon prep with you, and you read the text together, and you think about this. Are there ways that we can be inviting our laity, especially as we're eventually moving away from the strictures of COVID, and there's going to be these expectations that you talked about that we're going to do it lots of different ways. How can pastors reach out and draw on the gifts and the skills of their parishioners?
Yeah, exactly. Um, in addition to um, ask the parish leadership what they could use. What do they see are the greatest needs? Finding ways to reach out to those who don't have access to technology. Um, Writing notes to people who are in nursing homes, for example. There are people going to be in the congregations who are not able to participate in worship online. So who are they and how can they be reached out to?
Mhm.
Hosting Bible studies, which can be done online as well as in person at whatever distances, space, indoor, outdoor, are needed. And helping people create connection, I think, is one of the most important things we can be doing.
So that means that maybe pastors are going to have to let go of a sky of having
Maybe.
to do everything and control everything. Not that I would know anything about
Not
that.
that you would know.
Oh, none of us do that.
But I think, it is, you talk about, Lisa, the trust tax. Like
Mhm.
when we have an ask of certain people, when we ask things to change, there's a price that has to be paid for that. But I think it goes both ways. I think it's not
Absolutely.
just about parishioners. I think pastors are going to have to figure out what is the trust tax that they're willing to pay.
Yep. Absolutely. It goes both ways because trust is, as I'm sure you're aware, trust takes a long time to build, but it doesn't take a whole lot to expend it.
Yeah.
And uh, knowing what is the relationship that we have together, that we feel like we trust each other enough to do some of the hard work, but we can't do it all the time. And you're absolutely right, Leah. I'm so glad you brought it up. It goes both ways. It's how much trust do parishioners have in their clergy, and how much trust do clergy have in the parishioners. It absolutely goes both ways.
And I wonder too if denominational leaders need to be aware of this and to be proactive as well.
Mm,
And I'm sure bishops and regional ministers and are already having these conversations, but it seems to me that there may need to be some support, not just from the grassroots with parishioners, but also from the treetops, from denominational leadership to figure out ways to support their pastors to avoid the burnout, to avoid the feelings of utter exhaustion, and pastors just like, I'm done. I'm
Yeah.
done.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're absolutely right. The clergy need support from every direction in order to do this work.
Yeah. Stephen, what's another question that came up in the chat?
So one is, this is from Ann Davis. It's not so much of a question, but I do think it's very astute observation, and wanted to see if either one of y'all wanted to respond to. She says the following. This is in reference, Lisa, to the language we were talking about, congregants having a need to feel a sense of belonging within a system, and when that system is disturbed, it causes anxiety. This is what Ann says. May I suggest that safety and a sense of belonging in a particular church are concerns of those with white privilege, and that those in my BIPOC communities, that is, Black, Indigenous, persons of color communities, are literally burying our family members. Yes, 3 formats of Sunday worship at once is excessive, but what the message is has to stop being just God loves you and that you should feel comfortable. And that it's well past time that all church folk realize that getting real is what the gospel message is. Poverty, unemployment, looming homelessness, food insecurity, a crisis that will be an equalizer, ought not scare our white siblings to death. So would y'all like to respond to that observation?
Yeah, and I just want to say, Lisa, you have a really important section in the book on racism,
Right.
and that white privilege is a sky that needs to fall.
Yep.
And I really appreciated that. I mean, it was real talk for white folks.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, can you tell us a little bit about the work that you've been doing in backstory preaching to help preachers and ministers address their own racism and also systemic racism and some of that privilege that
Right.
that our listener has referred to?
Right. The need for safety and to belong is a fundamental human need that we're all born with, and we all deserve to have dignified and respected. And where we get into trouble is when people don't trust that I am in fact safe. That if I am, so addressing this as a white person, we absolutely have to give up our privilege. It should never have been ours to begin with. It is horrifying in its depth and scope, and how much of that privilege is the air that I breathe that I don't even know are the molecules coming into my body. I was so mad the other day that we're talking about God in one of our Bible studies for the clergy, with the preachers I work with, and God holding up God's hand to Moses so that Moses doesn't see God's face. And what popped into my head instantly was that in my imagination, the hand of God was an old white man's hand. And I thought, damn it just,
Wow.
it was instant. And it infuriates me to know that I have been gaslighted my entire life to think that that is the immediate image of God that would come to, and it just, so mad. And what is also true is because we have this privilege, there is going to be pain in giving it up. And what I worry about is no matter how much we agree that it has to be given up, that death and grief is death and grief. And if we tell people in power that they have to get over it and get rid of it and give it up because it's got to go, and it does, my worry is we will shame people and back them into a corner And people who are shamed and backed into a corner come out swinging.
Exactly.
And we have to have, if we are a church that believes in reconciliation, then we have to have a way out and a way back. So one of the things, for example, I suggest in the book that I think is of absolute paramount importance for the church, capital C, is that we form what I would call, riffing off of the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission, is Truth and Lamentation Commissions.
I love that.
Where we listen to the truth of what people of color and minorities and people who have been underprivileged because we made it that way, to listen for as long as it takes to that truth. And if we are a reconciling church, reconciliation requires amendment of life. We, those of us in power and privilege, need to be told what that amendment needs to be.
Right.
What does amendment of life look like? And we need to support people. We need to support people who are giving up that privilege so that they can do it gracefully, not shame-filled, because it's not going to help. It's only going to make it worse, but somehow gracefully, through truth, through reconciliation, through lamentation, and through amendment of life, so that we really can get to a resurrection on the other side that looks very different from the way I was allowed to grow up, and is one that dignifies every human being.
When you were talking about God's hand being white, it reminded me of the saying, when God is white, white is God.
Yeah.
And we're talking about idolatry.
Right, exactly. Yes.
But when the God itself is threatened, which is actually demonic, it's not God at all, the demonic will use its minions to protect itself.
Yes.
And so I think a lot of what we're seeing is this call to arms of the demonic.
Yes.
To respond with violence in order to keep that core of evil in place.
Right.
And so I know we have a question coming up about preaching between the election day and when the results become final. Because election day isn't just a day. It's going to be several weeks.
Yeah.
And Stephen, can you share with us what that question is?
Yeah, Leah, well, you pretty much just kind of hit the nail on the head right there. We've had probably at least 3 or 4 comments, questions that are all kind of summed up in that statement, that everything that we are looking at right now in the news is almost guaranteeing that we will not have the elections results finalized on election day. So there's several preachers out there, I'm one of them, that would love to hear some words of wisdom of how are we going to preach both pastorally and faithfully and prophetically in that sort of that period of waiting in which there is just perhaps the most amount of uncertainty that we have as a country right now. So just any general words of wisdom on what we should do as preachers, whether that time of waiting is days, weeks, or God forbid, months.
Yeah. I think a lot of the things that will help is naming what people are feeling. We hate uncertainty. We hate waiting. We don't know what's ahead. We're anxious about it. There is a really good reason that when the Israelites got into that desert, it didn't take too long before they said, "Can't we please go back?" I mean, really, it's miserable that the tension and conflict and anxiety of not knowing what is ahead is going to be immense. But we are not the first people to go through this. The Israelites did it. Jesus managed it when he was in the desert. There was, at the moment when Jesus came down off of that cross, they didn't know there was a resurrection yet. They didn't know that was ahead. If we believe that God follows us to the heights of heaven to the depths of Sheol, Is there a day or a place in the desert God is not going to be with us? So to be present, to remember, who are we about? What are we about? We are about loving our neighbor. So today, while we wait,
Mm,
how do I love my neighbor today? This moment, what words that next come out of my mouth will be words of love and reconciliation and grace and patience, and having those moments when we can go shout into our pillows and say whatever and write those letters that we never send, get it out of our systems, and then come back to the moment. You know, it is the spiritual tradition to live in the moment, not looking back on what is past, not borrowing trouble for what is the troubles of the day are sufficient thereof. God will meet us when we get there to the future. So don't miss God right now,
mm,
right
mm.
now.
Wow. One of the things that we're working on in the Clergy Emergency League is creating liturgy
Yeah,
to hold space for these emotions.
yeah, good.
So we are, Stephen is a liturgist, and he is working with a team to come up with a written liturgy that pastors can use in their congregations leading up to and after the election. Um, those of us who are in the clergy Facebook group, we are going to have a vigil on from when the polls close on election day for the next 24 hours, and just hold space for prayer. We're going to be on Zoom, and if other clergy want to come in and just, they're anxious, they need prayer, just to have somebody to abide with me,
Beautiful.
abide with me.
What a gift.
Yeah.
What a gift. That's wonderful. We're also going to be holding one of the things we do in backstory preaching. It's called a boot camp, and it's 5 days in a row, 1 hour online, and there's a particular process that I help clergy with, so that at least for that um, Sunday after the election, people will feel confident that whatever outcome or lack thereof, that at least that Sunday their sermon will preach. And so
Hmm.
again, having that the place to talk on the Tuesday, we're just going to pray rather than prepare sermons, because that will be preparing is to be in prayer. And then the other days are going to be actually working on our sermons. So yeah, a lot of good resources out there. So I'm delighted that you're working on that, the liturgies. That sounds like I can't wait to get my hands on them.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're another thing, and I'm going to talk about this in a little bit. I'm going to just show a slide that we have a meeting coming up, the Clergy Emergency League members meeting, this Thursday at 7. We're going to be talking through what are strategies that we need to put in place to help to quell the violence,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
we've already been told that the shot has gone across the bow, that there will be violence. And what is the role of clergy to be faithful witnesses for non-violence and also non-compliance with whatever usurpations of democracy might be planned?
Mm-hmm.
So we're trying to stay ahead of the curve on this and equip
Right.
pastors to not be caught like deer in the headlights, to not be surprised, to be clear-eyed about what we're facing, but also not to be alarmist, but just to be prepared,
Mm-hmm.
so that, like you said, to be equipped for whatever comes, that we'll have something that can sustain ourselves and our congregations in this tumultuous and this tumultuous time and this time of waiting.
Wonderful. That's great. That's
Yeah,
great.
yeah. Lisa, is there anything else that you'd like us to know about the gospel people don't want to hear? This is the book, and we invite people to actually, in the original announcement, we had a link to Black-owned bookstores online where you can purchase her book. She also has the book Backstory Preaching. That is a wonderful guide. I use it for my students. Your Lectio process for getting into a text is just wonderful. Is there anything else about the gospel people don't want to hear about the book itself that you want us to know?
Two things. One is I can't stress how important empathy is right now. Getting inside somebody else's skin. What are they afraid of? What do they love? Whom do they love? What matters to them? And then the other thing I would say is to be gentle and trust each other as preachers.
Mm,
We don't know what is happening inside somebody else's skin or
mm,
their families or their parishes, what they love, what they are afraid to lose. We all have to use our best judgment for preaching during this time, and we need each other and we need each other's support. So to trust that we are each making the best decisions we can with what we've got to work with. And if I can't do it for one moment, I'm going to trust Leah's going to pick it up, and then Stephen's going to pick it up, and I'll get back in the game with more of my faculties as soon as I can. And we keep
mm,
trading off.
mm.
So trust each other, support each other, work with each other in every way that we can.
Yeah, that's exactly one of the reasons we founded the group in the first place, is
Mhm.
that there aren't many places where clergy who are really wrestling with the prophetic can be honest about what they're dealing with their clergy colleagues,
Yeah.
and to think about, I am a blue bubble in a sea of red, and the threats to clergy are on the rise,
Yep.
and it is not a safe place, especially for clergy who are more vulnerable,
Mhm.
for clergy of color, for female clergy. The risks are enormous,
Yep.
and I think we're not always taking that into account.
Yep. I think you're right.
Yeah. So thank you so much for this conversation. This has been amazing. Just really, really appreciate what you have been sharing with us. And I want to let people know that this Thursday, as I said, we have our next Clergy Emergency League member meeting, where we will be talking about organizing and mobilizing clergy to help quell violence before and after the election. And for those of you who were on the last call, we had Lauren Grubaugh, who has expertise in organizing for nonviolent resistance and building community in the midst of this strife. And so we are very excited to have her back with us again. And we're going to be offering more opportunities for these kinds of conversations. We're going to be doing a book study coming up on, let's see, when is that? Next Monday, the 19th. We're going to be talking about the book On Tyranny. One of our steering committee members, Robert Franick, is going to be talking with Jim Antal about Tim Snyder's book On Tyranny and what are lessons that clergy can learn from that. And then in November, we're going to be talking with Jennifer Butler, who is the founder of Faith in Public Life, about her new book and how we can, again, continue thinking about how do we preach and minister in the post-election season.
Great.
Stephen, was there anything else that I missed that we need to announce about the Clergy Emergency League?
Not that I can think of, other than just to if you're watching and are new to us, make sure you check out our website at www.clergyemergencyleague.com. If you are a clergy person, and again we define that very broadly, so if you are ordained or a seminarian or teach in a seminary or are
Retired,
retired or in some sort of uh,
deacon.
yeah, deacon, elder, any sort of official leadership position in a denomination, you can join us at our private Facebook group, which is open to all those folks. But even if you're not clergy, then you can like this page, this public page that we are streaming on, to keep abreast of all that we're doing.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you, Lisa, for this wonderful conversation. Blessings on your ministry with pastors, and check out Backstory Preaching. It is a wonderful resource to give you the kind of spiritual guidance and practical tips, and the sermon boot camps. I mean, the mentoring. It's wonderful. It's like seminary after seminary. It's as Lisa explained to me when she first launched this. She's like, I'm the place that they can go when they're done seminary, but they still want to continue in their cultivating their craft. So thank you for your stewarding of those gifts, and the support that you give to pastors. It is immeasurable, and you are a blessing to us. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me, and blessings on all of us now.
Good night, everyone.